6 years ago, I was teaching in South Carolina, and my wife was teaching in Virginia, and I had a 6.5-hour drive, basically every other weekend, to and from Richmond, Virginia, and it gave me a lot of time to think, and I was building a new money and banking class I was going to teach, and I was trying to think, how can I combine two things I really want to do? I want to introduce clickers into my classroom, and I also want to use a lot of demonstrations. I want the students to actually experience economics, not just learn about it from me talking to them, right? So I want them to experience interest rates, I want them to experience inflation, things like that. And what I came up with was this idea of, I'm going to create a market where the students will generate extra credit, and then they'll buy the extra credit, and that will show them how all of these things I'm talking about in class actually function. So, let me see. There's a button here. So, I'm not an iClicker guy. I didn't know about it at the time. I use Socrative, but I'm not here to talk about clickers. I just wanted you to know that I start off, right, by putting clickers in my classroom. So basically, every lecture, I have about 3 clicker questions. And if the students get them right, then they generate a point of extra credit. So for every person in the class that is answering the question, if they get it correct, they have basically produced a point of extra credit. And so I have a website now that I've created with some funding from Babson College, where I teach. And so I have this imaginary class. And what you do is, after the lecture, you put in how much extra credit each person in your class has generated. Right? So I have Milton Friedman generated 2 points of extra credit. John Kane's got 3 points, right? So he got a question right that Milton Friedman got wrong. And then you go through and you just put that in, and that generates some extra credit in the market. So this is basically the layout from the professor's perspective, and you can see that we're on homework 4, and each homework or each assignment is associated with a few days of the lecture, right, where extra credit's being generated. And on day 19, 10 points were generated. On day 20, 9 points were generated. So you can see at the top here, there's 19 points of extra credit that are going to go on homework 4. But extra credit is perishable. You can't save the extra credit for later. It's like a hamburger, right? You make it, you have to eat it now. You can't put it in the fridge and eat it next year. So each time any of these people is answering a question, they are also getting paid a wage because they need to have an incentive. Why am I producing extra credit? Well, I'm producing it because I get paid. So you can see here below day 19, it says wages 2. And what is my wage? Well, when I was trying to come up with this, I had a brainstorming session with my friends. They wanted me to use some part of my last name. But my last name is Staveley-O'Carroll, so I thought that would be a little much for the students. So I went with my favorite football player, Rob Gronkowski. He goes by Gronks. If this takes off, he'll probably have a trademarking issue with me, but for now, it's okay. So the students have 38 Gronks at the moment, right, that they have produced through answering questions correctly, right? So they have some money available to them. And you might think Gronks is kind of awkward for them to say. Well, let me tell you, the beginning of the semester, the students are kind of awkward about it. By the end of the semester, they're talking about Gronks just as easily as they talk about dollar bills. Right? It's second nature to them at that point. There's a few other pieces of information. You put the due date when the homework's due, the weight of the assignment, so this homework is worth 10% of their grade. And then we see what the students see. So the students see a balance, right? This is Janet Yellen's sheet, and she has 10 Gronks. So she has answered enough questions to earn 10 Gronks. And then she also knows that there are 38 Gronks in the economy, so she knows the money supply. And then she sees how much she spent on previous assignments. And then homework 4, that's the one that's coming up. And she knows that it's worth 10% of her grade, and that there are 19 points of extra credit available. So if she clicks on See Details, she'll be able to put in how much she wants to spend on this assignment. And remember, the extra credit's going to go away. Those 19 points are going to be put on homework 4. She can't save those. But she can save her Gronks. She has 10 of them, or she can save her money. Right? So money is a store of value. And so she can choose to spend all 10, or maybe she'll choose to spend 2, right? And whatever she chooses to do, everybody else is making a choice as well, and I aggregate that together, and that gives me demand. So I have supply. Supply comes from how many questions the students answer correctly in class. And demand comes from how much the students want extra credit on this particular assignment, right? So how much do they want it for homework 4? Bring these two things together, and we get a market clearing price. Right? So the price of extra credit ends up being the demand aggregated together of how much each student has spent, divided by the supply, which was all the extra credit produced. And once you have this price, it tells me, well, how should I allocate the extra credit? Right? So if the price ends up being 2 gronks per point of extra credit, and Janet Yellows put 4 gronks. She gets 2 points of extra credit on homework 4. Then if I want something that's comparable across assignments, because not all assignments are worth the same amount. Some assignments are worth 10 points, 10% of your grade, some may be worth 30% of your grade. I have a value, right? And we saw that for homework 4, it's 10%. So I can get a weighted price where I take the price of extra credit and divide it by that value, and that tells me basically how much a student would have to spend to add 1 point of extra credit to their overall grade in the course, and that's comparable across assignments. So we can look at that weighted price and see how much inflation we have in the class, and anything else we want to look at, we can compare across time. This is essentially a consumption savings problem, right? So you can use it in micro principles, and I do, but I do a lot more with it in my money and banking class, because obviously money and banking is really about putting off consumption into the future through various different types of assets, and then how the Federal Reserve affects that decision, right? So basically each assignment is a time period. So we have homework 1 was, period 0, homework 2 is period 1, and so on and so forth. And you can see how the prices move. You see the weighted price moves a little differently because midterm 1 is worth more than the homeworks, and so from a weighted perspective, that extra credit you get on homework, midterm 1 is worth more than anything else. This creates a lot of teachable moments. So the point of this was I didn't want to have demonstrations that were sort of arbitrary, right? So everybody knows the two-sided auction where some students are buyers and some students are sellers, and you give them these prices and you say, well, this is your minimum price. You have to get something more than this, and this is your max you're willing to pay. You have to pay something less than this, and then they just interact with each other, right? But all of those incentives are arbitrary, right? I come up with them. I make an equation, and that gives me a list of numbers, and I give them a piece of paper with the numbers on them. This is not arbitrary, right? This is a real market for something they really want, and they're the ones deciding how much to spend, how valuable extra credit is to them. So a lot of interesting teachable moments come up in class about the market. For example, what does an increase in supply do to the market? What if students happen to do better in one particular set of lectures, and so they create more extra credit? Students do a very bad job of realizing that when there's more supply, they should spend more. So what ends up happening is the price of extra credit plummets anytime there's a lot of supply, because they don't realize this is when I should really be buying. So it's an opportunity for me to teach them about that. If there's more supply, prices should go down. Impact of wage inflation. This is something that I do in my money and banking class. I make the wages go up as the semester goes on. So this creates inflation in the class, which creates a negative real interest rate, which causes them to want to spend a lot, right? We can talk about all that, what wage inflation will do to the rest of the economy, through something that they're experiencing themselves. How does assignment value impact the market? So this always happens with midterm 1. They spend kind of a little bit at a time for homework 1, homework 2. The midterm 1 comes, they all pile all their extra credit on, right? Buy as much as they can. And they're shocked to find that the price of extra credit has skyrocketed. It's like, well, there's a lot more demand for extra credit on midterms than there is on homeworks, so that's going to happen. Then you can do applications, right? I don't have to bring candy to class if I'm going to do a demonstration. So, the public goods one where you give them some candy, they put it in. If they put it in, it doubles, and then they get more candy. But if they don't put it in, they get to keep their candy, right? Well, I can do that same demonstration, but I can do it with actual money, right? Gronks. So they can put more gronks in. The more gronks they put in, the more extra credit they generate, right? They're generating this public good. But they would rather everybody else put their gronks in, right? They want to keep their gronks so they can buy that extra credit when the homework assignments do. So this creates a really effective way of showing them how public goods are underfunded through something that they care about, rather than doing it with something like candy, which honestly I find a lot of students don't like anymore. So I have a lot of extensions. The extensions are not part of the website because we're sort of developing it one step at a time. But these are things I do in my money and banking class, which I think is very great for the students because it's very experiential. We talk about American students, and I have a lot of international students as well, but most of them don't really understand the effects of inflation because inflation of 2% has a very minimal effect on your life. If you lived in a hyperinflation economy, you would understand inflation a lot better, right? So I let them live in a hyperinflation economy for 3 months. How does hyperinflation work? Every couple of classes I raise the wages, but since I'm raising it by a fixed amount, the percent change is actually lowering. So initially, the wages go up and they don't realize it, so they don't spend very much. But then they suddenly realize, whoa, I have a lot of gronks, but everybody else has a lot of gronks. I better start spending them. So you can see what happens is that prices start picking up really quickly. And what we get in the middle of the semester is that inflation is much higher than the actual increase in wages. And what's going on is that they're expecting higher inflation, so they increase their spending, so money velocity rises. Right? So now we're just talking about the equation of exchange. Right? Then there's almost always a crash at the end of the semester. They didn't save because there's a hyperinflation economy, so they have no savings. And then the final exam comes, and they only have a little bit of money left, and then the price crashes because they didn't save for the final. So all of this creates very interesting talking points in class where we can go through it as the semester progresses, and they can see what's going on in their hyperinflation economy. These are the numbers behind it, and I put these up because, first of all, at the top you see what the real interest rate is. And this really gives them an idea. Well, there's nominal interest, so I create what I call the Bank of Extra Credit, the BEC, and they can earn interest by not spending, right? Or they can pay some interest by, if they want to spend more, they want to borrow for an exam or something like that. They always ask, can I borrow on the final exam? I said, no, you cannot borrow on the final exam, right? We have to have some end conditions. So what you see is that I have these nominal interest rates. They pay 20% if they want to borrow, they get 10% if they save, but then you see the real interest rates, right, based on inflation. And the real interest rates are mostly negative because there's a hyperinflation economy. And they start getting this idea, right, really quickly. Wait a minute, all this inflation, I should have bought extra credit way earlier in the semester when it was cheap. What was I doing? And that's when they start really spending and causing more inflation. So it's a nice little story. They see the effects of their changes in expectations on prices. I put bonds in. One of the things you might not realize when you teach about financial instruments is that most students don't know if you buy a bond whether you're borrowing or lending. That's something they learn when they actually issue their own bonds. Says, oh, you're issuing a bond, pick a face value. So how much is the bond going to be worth? Like 10 gronks? Fine. We're going to use Socrative clickers to figure out the max price you can get from the class. 8. So you're getting 8. So what did you just do? Did you just lend money? Did you just borrow money? Well, the students figure it out. Oh, I'm getting money. I must have borrowed, right? I got 8 gronks. I'm going to owe 10 gronks. I had to give this person 10 gronks later. So they start getting the ideas. I put stocks in. I don't have a lot of time. Basically, I base it on random rolls, but I make it so there's no systematic risk. There's a hedge stock. The only thing that happens is the risk is moved around in the class based on who wants to buy stocks and who doesn't. The way I set it up is that there's 1 point generated per student, and then who gets the extra credit. That just depends on what they do with the market, right? And then the last, I guess that was the last one. So the last thing I wanted to say is that there's a website. If you want to join, if you want to try it out, you can email me. My email address is Staveley-O'Carroll, and then Babson was like, maybe another J. Staveley-O'Carroll will show up, so let's put a 1 on there. I'm like the only professor who has a 1. I don't know what they were thinking. And then my developer, Eagle Wu, he is also available. He does all the technical stuff with the website. So thank you very much.